continuous learning and fostering strong relationships, which is why events like this are so important to us. We're always looking for opportunities to connect with the community, share information, and grow together. So with that, I want to get to the main event here, and we are very fortunate today to have with us Gregory Flatt. Greg is the president of Flat Earth Networking, and now Greg has 28 years experience and has deep expertise in network security, cybersecurity, and network architecture. So as you can see from the screen, what we're talking about today is zero trust network access. Very timely topic and very crucial, especially as organizations are dealing with remote work, cloud resources, and things like that. So we're confident you're going to take away some valuable information and some actionable insight from the session today. And without any further ado, join me in giving a warm welcome to Greg Flatt.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, I don't think that could have gone any better if I wrote it myself. But no, I appreciate all the kind words. Thank you very much. Again, Brian is your account manager located here in Indianapolis. In the back, we have Mike Williams. He is our Director of Technical Services, and he is running the live stream portion, making sure that everything is working. And just want to double check, Mike, do we have audio? All right, cool. So we've got audio, that's fantastic. All right, so as Brian shared, we're going to be talking about zero trust architecture today. And we could get deep into a lot of different aspects of it. We don't have a lot of time. We only have about a half an hour before we get into some questions. So I'm going to give an overview of what a ZTA is. And I'm going to be working from the knowledge base of the NIST documentation. There's two different NIST documents that we pulled this information from. Those are freely available. If anybody feels as though they want to sit down and read about 800 pages of information, then everything is in there. All the goodness is in there, I promise. All right, so first, I want to start with just what is zero trust? What is that? And I'm going to read the definition. I'm 54, so I've got a couple different pairs of glasses up here to switch between. But so as defined in NIST 207, which is the 800-207, which is the document that we're working from, zero trust is a cybersecurity paradigm focused on resource protection and the premise that trust is never granted implicitly, but must be continually evaluated. Okay, so it's not granted. Trust is never granted. Basically, it boils down to trust no one. And if anybody in here had the X-Files theme going through their head, then you're my kind of folks. But trust no one. It gets a little bit deeper than that, but that's the underlying premise of that. And then zero trust architecture is an end-to-end approach to enterprise resource and data security that encompasses identity, that's both persons and non-person identities, credentials, access management, operations, endpoints, hosting environments, and the interconnecting infrastructure. So, I mean, that's a lot that goes into zero trust. So the goal for today is to talk about the NIST risk management framework, how to build a zero trust architecture, what all of that means and how those things work together. Also, one of the key things is, as we all know, the traditional perimeter is dead. I mean, the traditional perimeter that we have grown up with for many, many, many years has tried over the course of the past probably 15 years to migrate to the cloud, and I have seen that happen multiple times. This is about the fourth iteration of that, and I think it's going to stick. AWS has done a very, very good job of making it so that it is easy to get into the cloud, but very difficult to get out of the cloud, and that causes a significant amount of difficulty when it comes to architecting in a zero trust environment. And then these are the two documents that we're working from. So the ZTA is the NIST 800-207, and then the risk management framework is NIST 800-37R2. So those are the two documents that we will be using a lot of information from. So one of the things that I had been thinking a lot about and how to communicate zero trust and make it so that it is easily digestible and easy to understand, that everybody in the room and everybody on the live stream is going through a similar process in their everyday life with many things that they do. That there's a lot of processes and techniques that we use every day that apply to this, and it is a very common sense approach to how we define this architecture. So I was trying to think of an interesting story that I could illustrate that. And immediately what came to mind was, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I'm on the road a lot, so I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And one of my favorite authors is Dean Koontz. Does anybody know who Dean Koontz is? He writes some really weird, wacky, kind of spaced out stuff. And one of his series was Odd Thomas, and it was about a fry cook in New Mexico. And I remember listening to this, and on the audiobook, he says that he is the best fry cook. He makes the fluffiest pancakes ever. That he makes the lightest, fluffiest pancakes ever. So I thought, there is no way that this fictional character, written by an author that I don't know, in a story that I have never read before, possibly could do a better job than me if I put my mind to it. So about 20 years ago, I decided that I was going to figure out how to make the best, fluffiest pancakes that ever existed. So if we're looking at anybody in here cook? So when you want to cook a new recipe, what is the first thing you do?
Look up for more information about it.
Yeah, look up more information, grab a cookbook, grab a document that outlines the way that somebody else has already done it. So we get that documentation, we get that recipe, and I grabbed the one right off the shelf and looked up. It was the Betty Crocker cookbook, and I found a recipe and I started. So every Sunday, I committed, every Sunday morning, I was going to make pancakes for my family. I don't even eat pancakes. I don't even like pancakes. But I committed that I was going to make pancakes for my family every Sunday morning until I got it perfectly right. I tested, I measured, and I iterated for 2 years. For 2 years, and I finally came up with what I felt was the best possible recipe. It was flexible, it was easy to make with readily available products. I could cook it over a campfire, I could make it on my stove at home, I could make changes. I even adapted it so that I could make waffles in Able Skeevers, which if you guys have never had an Able Skeever, you're missing out. It's like a little pancake pocket filled with chocolate, and it's delicious. But through that process, I started with a framework. I iterated and made changes over time, very, very carefully and measured, and then came up with a product that I thought was a good working product for what I had set out to do. And not only do I make these pancakes, all my kids make these pancakes, my kids' romantic entanglements make these pancakes. I even have a friend whose daughter, they live in Italy, she makes the pancakes, and they don't even have buttermilk. But anyway, I digress. The point is that we use these processes, and we go through these iterative processes in our lives every single day. And ZTA is really no different. I mean, going through, and the key component is that first you have to decide that you're going to do it, and it's a mindset. It's not a technology. Zero Trust architecture is not a technology, it's a mindset. All right. So moving away from pancakes, even though lunch just arrived here, but moving away from pancakes, what defines what zero trust is? Because we trust nobody, but we have to trust somebody. This isn't, I don't trust Sally down the hall, or I don't trust Steve. It's, I don't trust that the systems that they're on aren't already compromised. So that's what a contested network is. And so moving from the trust no one is never trust, always verify. We're not going to believe that the system has not been compromised since the last time that we utilized it, or the last time that we accessed it, or Brian's computer hasn't been compromised as he's coming into the network infrastructure. We're always going to verify. The other key important point of this is that the Zero Trust architecture is tailored to each of your individual needs. A Zero Trust in one environment, even with the exact same systems, with the exact same technology, the Zero Trust in two separate environments will not look the same. because the needs are different, the risks are different, and that implementation is different. So zero trust is not a thing that is defined necessarily by somebody else. That's defined inside the organization. And it is applied based on the needs through the risk management framework of your individual organization, network, and computing needs. All right? So it's tailored to your organization. And then it involves every aspect of the business. Every single part of the business has to be committed and dialed in to zero trust. As technologists, it's easy for us to say, oh, cool, you know, we're going to do microsegmentation and this VLAN, and we're going to do this and this authentication, which we'll get into all of that stuff here in a minute. But if it impacts the way that the organization operates, or it impacts the business drivers, the leaders, then they're going to come and say no. That's why it requires organization-wide, and it requires the involvement of everybody in your technology stack as well. Not just the cybersecurity folks. It requires DevOps, DevSecOps, infrastructure. Every aspect of the technology stack has to be bought into this premise, otherwise it's not going to work. Right? So the core components of ZTA, and these have different names based on what technology manufacturer or book you're reading, but this is out of the NIST, so we're going to use the NIST. Every marketing company decided that they wanted to have something that was special to them to differentiate them, but at the core, what we have is a policy engine, and this is what makes a decision in real time. We have the policy administrator that manages each one of the individual sessions, and I've got a better diagram to make this even clearer here in just a second. And then policy enforcement points. These are the technology things that go into implementing a zero trust architecture. So policy engine, policy administrator, and then the policy enforcement point or points, because there will be multiple, most likely, in your organization. So what does that all look like? Here's a good diagram of everything that ties into the core components. So here we have our subject, that's the person, the system that they are accessing with, the policy enforcement point, and the enterprise resource. Those run in the data plane. The data plane is where your information actually goes across and is used by your people and resources. So that's inside the data plane. In the control plane, you have the policy engine and administrator that have input from lots of different sources in order to make real-time decisions on whether or not that subject is allowed to access that resource. That could be behavioral analytics, that could be, you know, of course, your data access policy, your authentication mechanism, how you're authenticating, even the criticality of the resource that you're accessing. So it's possible that you might have one set of policies if the resource that you're accessing is, say, a website. You might say, you know what, regular password authentication is good enough. That's good enough to identify who the person is, and we are going to allow that to go through our policy administrator and down to the policy enforcement point. Where if they're accessing highly restricted or sensitive data, you might require something all the way up to a adaptive MFA that is looking at user behavior, looking at time of day, country of origin, lots of different components, but also pulling in real-time threat feeds. All of this, looking at logs to see if this person is logged in from a different location within the past few minutes. There's a lot of information that is being fed into this system, and like I said, this isn't one technology. This is a mindset, and this is the system that is being fed into the system in order to make the real-time decision whether or not that user is allowed to access that resource. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. So the tenets of zero trust are identity governance, endpoints, and data flows. These are the things that we need to define, and we're going to get a lot more into the risk management framework where we look at how we do this. But identity governance, you need to make a decision on how you are going to identify that the source is who they say they are. Remember, we're working under the presumption that the network is contested, that there are bad guys in the system, there's bad guys on the network, and we want to make sure that when this individual, our user, tries to access that resource that they need in order to do their job, that we are verifying that that person is who they say they are. The endpoints, we have to identify every single endpoint, and an endpoint isn't just a laptop. So it's not just the computer. It could be mobile devices, it could be servers, other resources on the cloud, services running on a specific server. So if we want to treat the services that are coming off of an existing server separately, then we have to identify those as endpoints. That's the resource. So every device, every user, every service, every resource has to be identified and cataloged so that we can apply the zero trust architecture mindset to it. And then data flows. This is where we know the location to insert the policy enforcement points. We need to make sure that the data is encrypted, at rest, in use, in motion. We want to ensure that all of that is stored, kept private, because again, zero trust assumes that the network is contested. It assumes that everything that you are doing, if it doesn't fall within this framework, is exposed and viewable. So, all right. Any questions about the tenets here? So how do we implement zero trust? Now we know that we've decided that this is something we're going to do. We're going to make pancakes. We're going to do zero trust. How do we do it? Well, the good news is a lot of the systems that you're already running have components that you need already integrated into them. So it is a transition, not a complete rebuild or lift and shift. So highly likely that you can use existing systems and an existing architecture and just make some changes over time. Like I said, it took me 2 years to come up with the pancake recipe. If it takes 2 years to implement your zero trust, then I think that you're probably ahead of the curve. I do. So first thing you do is you look at your current infrastructure and you make a determination on whether or not the systems that you have already deployed have the ability to fold into this mindset, into this zero trust mindset. And then you need to make a decision whether or not you're going to keep those things or if you are going to change those out to something that you can put in the system that has the zero trust. So looking at the different ways that we can upgrade, there's configuration-based upgrades. That's what I was just talking about. You already have a system that exists and all you're doing is making some configuration changes. And that could be, again, microsegmentation with your networking and your VLANs, making sure that all of the resources are as compartmentalized as humanly possible. That can be done with the switches that you already have. So there's not a need to make a change. You just need to define it and then execute it. Software enhancements. This is, again, maybe the systems that you have in order to get to the zero trust that you have defined requires a firmware upgrade or a features upgrade. So the hardware is good, or the base system is good. You just need to upgrade to get the extra features in order to do that. We see that a lot with firewalls. A lot of firewall manufacturers are on this platform kick, and everybody says all we have to do is just add this feature, pay this money, add this feature, and then configure it, and bam, we've got some component of the zero trust architecture. Typically with the firewalls, it's network access, so ZTNA, zero trust network access. And then infrastructure upgrades, this is actually having to remove and add additional equipment, replace equipment, which is going to be very expensive. But then the big thing is, and it's at the bottom, but it really is truly part of the initial step, and that is policy and governance upgrades, or updates. I go back to every part of the business. Every component within your business infrastructure has to believe that this is the right way to go. Adopt it and support it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I mean, I've seen a lot of times that we have come in and we think that the technologists have done a great job. And a good example is we did single sign-on, which is a component, which is something, a best practice that you would want to look at for ZTA anyway. We were doing a single sign-on. This is very early on at a doctor's practice. Well, the doctors decided that they didn't like to have to authenticate every time they went up to a workstation. They wanted just to be able to walk up, enter their information, and it's the only time that I have seen where I had doctors on one side of the table and technologists on the other side of the table, and the doctor said, "What I say goes, I save lives." And the technologist said, "You save lives with the technology I provide." And I said, "I will be waiting outside for just a few minutes. When this works out, let me know and I'll come back." But the policies have to reflect the zero trust principles and the zero trust architecture in order for the technologists to be able to do the job that they need to do, which is implementing the technology and systems required to enforce all of the zero trust architecture. Right? And then big key thing, use the risk management framework, the NIST risk management framework as your roadmap. It is fantastic. It's an iterative process, that allows you to start going through all of the policy changes, all of the definitions, and go through that cycle numerous times in order to refine what your end product is going to be when you decide in your organization that your zero trust architecture is implemented. Because remember, your ZTA looks different than everybody else's ZTA. Because it's your network, not their network. It's your resources, not their resources. It's your users, not their users. So it is. The risk management framework, the NIST risk management framework, is an excellent roadmap. It's an excellent place to start so that you can reference an outside document as you're going through the process. You're not alone. And it's freely available. It's very long. There's also some resources online that can help with that. All right. So here's what the risk management framework looks like in practice. These are the steps that you go through. So the first is to prepare. And this is basically to make the decision that you're going to use this tool, you're going to use this process to generate your zero trust architecture. That's number one. That's prepare. And then you're going to categorize. This is a long-term process because when you're categorizing, you have to identify all of those resources. Every server, every service, every resource, every user, every scenario. You want to categorize everything you possibly can going through the risk management framework in order to have all of the components necessary to make decisions further down the pipeline. Because this is foundational and builds on itself. So you have to start with the preparation, then you go through the categorization, and you categorize all of your data, all of your systems. It's going to take a long time. Even in a relatively small network, it is going to take a long time to discover and categorize all of these things. Because the first thing you need to do in the prepare is decide how you're even going to categorize them. You know, am I using a 5-point scale? Am I using a 3-point scale? Do I want stoplights? Do I, red, yellow, green? How do I want to categorize them? That's in the preparation. Then you go through and you categorize all of the different components. And then you select and tailor and document the controls. First select, you document the controls that you are going to use in your ZTA. So this is where you're identifying what is my policy enforcement point going to look like? What are my policies going to be around identity and governance? What are all of these things? We're selecting all of the individual controls. And I didn't reference it in this one, but you could pull the cybersecurity framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework, into this equation as well. And that is specific to the controls. But most people, especially I know the technical people that I talk to, they know the controls that they have, they know the controls that they want, they understand. And through this process, it'll help refine every aspect of that. And then we implement. So we're going to take we've got our policies, we know our context, we know what's categorized where, we know how that we're going to implement these controls, and then we implement it. Automation is critical at this point. If you don't already have an automation process or you haven't looked at that, I would advise you to start that now if this is something that you're interested in, because again, what we're doing in a zero trust environment is we are looking at every single request at the session level. So every single session, and it is not only being evaluated at the initial connection point, but it is going through and evaluating with new data all the time, cyclically. So I might be allowed, if I try to connect with my laptop and the policy says, all right, you have antivirus and it's running and it's up to date, and you're on a VPN, and so it goes through all of the checks, and you have identified yourself through multi-factor authentication, and then say you change the policy while I'm connected, and now for identity it requires biometrics. The system has to be able to kill that session. I am no longer in compliance with the zero trust architecture and the policy because it was changed while I was using it. So the policy enforcement point has to be able to kill it in real time and restart the authentication process and prompt me and say, put your fingerprint on the fingerprint reader. Okay, cool. Now you can get back in. That's where the automation comes in, and it is absolutely critical if you are going to be able to do those assessments over and over again in real time and be able to, if a policy changes, kill the session and restart the session. So it's very important there. And that's part of the continuous evaluation, the assess. So what we're going to do is we're going to look and we are going to assess continuously on, do we have the right controls in place? Have we implemented the right technology? You know, this is us going through the risk management process. But we're going to continuously evaluate the strength and ability of the systems, policies, and controls that we have in place to make sure that it is still meeting what our requirements are, or if the requirements change, maybe you are subject to a federal regulation and that federal regulation gets updated. You need to then be able to pop back into this process and assess what the requirements are and step back to whatever step is necessary in order to continue to build and enforce that zero trust architecture. Then authorize, that includes all of the updates and changes. Any updates and changes have to be authorized. The authorization is an accountability step in the risk management framework. So it's, if something has to change, there needs to be a process in place that will govern how that change happens. Change management programs, change management process, who has the authority to do what, who can approve what. That's an authorize. And then monitor. We have to, in order to be able to enforce this, we have to observe everything that's going on inside the organization. So, real-time evaluation of log data. Has something changed on the source? Maybe there was a compromise on the source that was fed back into the policy engine, and the policy engine says, all right, that changed, now we need to tell the policy enforcement point to kill the session. So ongoing behavior observation, that is human behavior, systems behavior, resource behavior, and again, talking about automation, you're going to be generating tons and tons and tons of enriched data that needs to be evaluated and in real time to determine whether or not that session should be allowed or should be able to continue. So it should be allowed in the first place or should it be able to continue? All right. Any questions about the risk management framework? I know we're ripping through a lot of information here. All right. So security best practices. What do we want to do in order to make sure that we are prepared to really go through and implement the zero trust architecture and have it be effective? First one is adaptive MFA. So multi-factor authentication, adaptive MFA, and that is, you know, outlined by geolocation information, could be you know, stuff like velocity of location change, I was here in Indianapolis, I logged in, 5 hours later I logged in from Nashville where I'm from. That's acceptable. Maybe I log in here, 30 seconds later I log in from Nashville. That's unacceptable. The adaptive MFA needs to be able to identify that and kick that out as a failure. Okay? Microsegmentation and encryption. I talked about this a little bit before, but microsegmentation is VLAN to the nth degree. It is basically trying to create a containerized location for each resource or service that we're running, so that if something does happen in our contested network, again, we're assuming that it's contested, we're able to clearly identify that a resource has been compromised. We can shut that resource off and not have to worry about whether or not there was lateral movement between the systems. It gives us much more granular control, but the management goes through the roof. The management requirement goes through the roof when you go to microsegmentation. I mean, just think about in a medium-sized network with maybe 300 servers and all of the users and then all of the IoT devices, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of different microsegments, micro VLANs that would have to be defined in order to do that. Again, that's where a software-defined network and automation comes to play and is your best friend here. And then role-based and attribute-based access controls. Again, Brian shouldn't have the same access as I do to certain systems. But on the flip side of that, even though I am the owner of the company, I shouldn't have the same access to some of the systems that Mike has, because he's our Director of Technical Services and manages the systems. I don't necessarily need management access. So the role-based access is very important. And then attribute access, those all make sense. We use those things every day. So it's implementing that. And then user behavior analytics. Being able to detect behavioral anomalies is really crucial when it comes to implementing our zero trust architecture, and specifically with zero trust network access, because we're allowing users to access systems. We need to make sure that the people who are accessing the systems are doing them in a way that they are expected to. So the user behavior analytics allows us to collect data over time and to determine what each individual person, how they access and utilize these resources. And if they deviate from that, then we need to be able to detect that and kill that session. And we've seen that actually in several security incidents that we have been involved in helping to research. The user analytics, the behavioral analytics is what was the key indicator that something had changed, because the threat actor had gained access and had gotten through some of the other layers, and then they were changing the system in a way that the regular user never did. And it immediately kicked off, the security tool kicked off and said, this person is acting unusual. You might want to go take a look. And we've seen that on several occasions. So automated incident response is another good one. And with zero trust, again, this is kind of a core tenet of zero trust. You need to be able to, through your continuous evaluation, be able to determine whether or not that session is still valid and on the current set of policies. And if it's not, kick them out, boot them out. Then a couple of areas that we have had some trouble with is vendor or third-party access control. One, you need to make sure that anybody who is accessing your systems, a third party or a vendor, and we are a managed service provider, so we access a lot of systems, and this applies to people like us as well, that it goes through all of these same controls, all of the same authentication controls, it goes through all of the same behavioral analytics, and through all of the session authentication that anything else would. And sometimes vendors can be difficult. Not us, but sometimes. Sometimes vendors can be difficult, and they don't want to change their systems in order to conform to your security requirements. And remember, this is your stuff. You get to say, You want to come play in my sandbox, you're going to play by my rules. And that's the important thing. And then another area that we have seen a lot of struggle is in the cloud native security, and how to extend that into systems that aren't even real. Services that could be running that are not what we think of as a traditional computer sitting up in the cloud. How do we access that? CASB comes into play very, very heavily with that. But there's a lot of controls that are being built into, and if you are looking at moving to the cloud, if you haven't already, whether you're doing software as a service or you have your own cloud environment, you need to make sure that it is considered when you are looking through your zero trust architecture and building that from the first point. And then the other key point, and this goes back to the doctor, user-centered experience. How many people here have users on their network? How many people have users that are could be a little difficult on their network? What we don't want to do is give them a reason to pick up the phone and call the help desk. We want to make sure that when we are implementing zero trust, we are thinking about their experience and how they interact with the technology to ensure that the technology is as transparent as humanly possible. We want to make it as easy for them to do their job as we can. It keeps them from calling into the help desk. All right. So I see the dessert is right out the door, so we're running right on time. A couple things here. Zero trust, and again, I can't stress this enough. It's a mindset, not a technology. There is no one technology that you can go get and bam, you have zero trust. It has to be permeating through all of your organization, all of your policies, all of your technology. It is important that once you've adopted this mindset, that if you have in-house developers, that they have it as well, that everybody understands why it's important and what it's providing for the organization. But it's also an evolving process. 20 years ago, when you would look at a network diagram and it would say, untrusted network, the WAN, trusted network. That's still, you see that quite a bit today. Even then, I looked at it and said, really, should it be untrusted and semi-trusted? Or partially trusted? I don't know if I want to go all the way to trusted. I don't even trust myself sometimes. I don't know if anybody else here has ever programmed a switch, but Cisco, if you don't do right mem, it doesn't save the running configuration. And 6 hours into configuring an enterprise switch, rebooting it to see if it comes back, and it doesn't. So I don't even trust myself. But it's an evolving process. The risk management framework is a proven path. That is absolutely something that we can use in every single organization. It was written for federal agencies predominantly, but it can be used in every single organization. I have seen application in healthcare, retail, logistics, manufacturing, federal, every aspect. The risk management framework is a proven path. Success requires collaboration across all teams. Again, can't emphasize enough. You got to get buy-in from the top. Everybody has to agree that that's the best choice. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time and end up with a lot of headache. And then zero trust is a journey, just like my pancakes, 2 years. Zero trust is a journey. It's not a one-time setup. So we start today. In 2 years, we can say we have achieved the first phase of the zero trust architecture that we have envisioned. And then you go through the process again and again and again. So it's a journey, it's ongoing, and it should be ingrained in all of the aspects of the business that we do. All right. So these are the two documents. I will send this out, but these are the two documents that we're using. So the NIST, yep, that's right. The 800-207 is the ZTA. The 37R2, which was just updated in 2020, is the RMF. They are, again, freely available, PDFs. Download them, read them, live them, love them. fall asleep to them, whatever it is. These are great resources. And then the websites also, these are just the PDF downloads, but the websites also have some really, really good information and individual things that you can go through, assessments and other things in order to be able to utilize these. NIST has done a great job of putting that together. All right. I worked through a lot of information. I haven't done a public speaking engagement in 5 years, so this is new. Thank you for being very gracious to me. I am sure that I forgot anything. Brian, do you think of anything that I might have forgotten?
Well, I'm just curious, listening to everything here, like, what would you say are some common pitfalls or, challenges that organizations run into when they start down this process of ZTA?
That is an excellent question. So what are some pitfalls? Believing that it's a technology is one thing that we have seen, and I am thinking specifically of, and we have a blog article about it on our monthly blog, where Fortinet implemented ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access, and they did a fantastic job. Everything that was documented was beautiful. Their solution is really good, but it is not the solution for everybody, and it is not the solution for everything with Zero Trust architecture. That's specific to ZTNA, and it's specific to that product. So one of the biggest challenges that I see people when they start to go down this path is they say, oh, Zero Trust, I'm going to go to Palo Alto and deploy their platform, and I'm going to use their Zero Trust. And they haven't gone through the previous steps of getting adoption and buy-in from the business itself, and going through and building, categorizing, and everything else. Because then they get in and they say, all right, I'm ready to go. What do I turn on and where? You haven't gone through the categorization and all of the other foundational steps that are necessary. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Excellent. Yes.
So I have a question. Sometimes, when you change systems, you get feedback from the users where now this is slower and now whatever. So do you run into any of that with, after a company has implemented, this architecture, do they run into concerns other than like the doctors that are like, we don't want to sign in, every time. But outside of that, is there any, because of all this additional activity in the background, is there any concern with bandwidth, speed?
That's an excellent question. So during the implementation of Zero Trust, have we seen an impact, or how do we deal with the impact where users come back and say, this didn't work this time like it did last time? It might be slower, it might be different, I might have another layer of authentication or something to that nature. That's where the buy-in from the business is so important, from the top of the organization, so that you can say, yes, we have implemented. Security is not convenient. And that is something that we fight every single day. We're getting in the middle. We are inconveniencing our users. We're adding latency, we're adding authentication, we're adding steps, we're adding different screens, stuff they haven't seen. So there's always going to be an element when you change that people are like, I don't want it. And by the way, those doctors, what they ended up doing, we went to a smart card. We thought it would be easy. They ended up leaving their smart card in the card reader and walking off, so their whole lanyard was just hanging there. It's like, nope. But so it's during the preparation phase, part of that is also to prepare your user base that these things are going to be happening, that we're going to be adding them. And if you have implemented a Zero Trust architecture and gone through and you have extensive microsegmentation, authentication, and everything else, ransomware probably isn't a concern of yours, because there's no way for it to move laterally, and you're going to catch it very, very fast. So your dwell time isn't going to be a problem. But because of that, your users are going to be impacted. That's why we need to always be concerned about the user-centric process, and make sure that we are enabling them as transparently as possible to be able to use the technology to do their jobs. But unfortunately, that's just a part of it. They're going to, I always tell people that I can implement the most advanced monitoring solutions in the world. I am going to hear about a problem from a user before the system, every single time. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
When are we going to get the Flatt Earth cookbook?
Well, I also I get harassed by my kids. I did competitive barbecue for 6 years as well. So we'll see. We'll see. I love to eat. I love to cook. So it's a lot of fun. Good question, though.
Actual question. When I'm talking to a vendor and trying to assess a new solution, every vendor under the sun tells you now that they do zero trust. You call and order lunch, and they tell you they do zero trust.
Yes.
So like, what questions should I ask when I'm talking to someone to get a sense of whether they actually do this or they're just using the latest set of buzzwords?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So how do we communicate with vendors or partners or outside agencies in order to ensure what they are proposing is actually zero trust? You have to have your own zero trust architecture first, and then you can say, because you're right, 100% of the people that I talk to, it's AI and zero trust. Yeah. Hey, we're AI, we've got a chat bot, you can talk to it and it'll summarize all of the log data. Okay, sure. And it's zero trust. Really? Okay, so what engine, what large language model are you using for that chatbot? Well, ChatGPT, so it's not zero trust. Okay, cool. But if you have your zero trust architecture, at least the preparation part of it done, then what you can have an informed conversation with them and say, this is our implementation of zero trust, because what they're doing is completely different than what anybody else is doing, because again, it's organizational, it's based on what your needs are. So you can say, this is our implementation of zero trust. How does your program fit within my architecture? And not just take it at face value. But you're right, in marketing companies, marketing departments inside organizations are strong, they are powerful, and they make up buzzwords, and they throw those out, and they're similar sounding buzzwords, so it's not, and zero trust is not a buzzword. It should never be a buzzword. And I would ask them, say, what's your implementation? How do you define zero trust? What is your implementation, and how would this affect how would this fold into my model?
Sure.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, excellent.
People let me know.
Good thing.
So I talked excuse me, a lot about segmentation.
Yes.
So I use example of a network with 300 internal servers. How would you go about segmenting those 300 servers? Would you do it by functionality or something else?
You can do it by functionality or something else.
Okay.
You can do it by, and again, it's based on your policy and what you want to do. If a lot of our systems are virtualized, so we're running a hypervisor, and then we have the systems, the guest OS is on those, and it might even just be a container and not have anything except a resource on it. I would probably look at it based on functionality and say this particular resource needs its own microsegmentation in order to be able to clearly define who can access it through my policy. I said it gets deep. It is not in any way trivial. I mean, when we're looking at VLANs, there's a private school that we did some work. They originally had a flat network, about 2,700 users on a single broadcast domain, and they were wondering why they were having issues. But so we introduced a whole bunch of VLANs based on user type, students, faculty, admin. It seemed like a good segmentation. New person came in and decided that they were going to rip out all those VLANs because they were just too complex. And then they were having problems again. So this type of segmentation is less about network congestion and more about granularly controlling access. And again, we're talking about assuming that it's a contested network. We want to make sure that we minimize lateral movement. So if that resource was compromised, we want to keep it from being able to compromise the resource adjacent to it. So I would probably do it. It just depends. Again, the management costs go through the roof when you start adding that level of granularity and complexity. Complexity costs money. So whatever looks right, feels right for the organization, that is your implementation of zero trust architecture. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anything else? Yes.
I know you mentioned a lot about getting buy-in from the business. So what advice do you have to have that conversation with the business to get buy-in?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
What advice do you have as far as having that conversation with the business?
Scare them. The zero trust, and again, like I said before, with the example of ransomware, if you have a fully implemented zero trust architecture, and you are running and are able through automation to manage and maintain all of the microsegmentation that it would really require in order to do that, you don't worry about compromise as much. One, because you're constantly monitoring it. That's one of the tenets of zero trust. You're constantly monitoring the systems so that the dwell time of anybody inside your organization, inside that system, would be very, very low. But there is definitely a cost associated with it, a user experience cost and a real monetary cost. It's not cheap in order to do it. And the zero trust gives you a program that is highly flexible and adaptable as the business is going out and maybe they're acquiring additional business units or they're divesting, whatever it is. It will allow flexibility for the business in order to add and remove resources very quickly because you have a process that you know has been vetted to go through and do that. So I would talk about the efficiency of being able to determine who accesses what and the significantly enhanced security of what inside the environment, so reducing that, and then might even have a conversation with your insurance provider and say, we have gone above and beyond what your minimum requirements are in order to meet the needs for the policy. I want a break on my insurance, because we've invested in all of this process. But it really depends on what your senior management looks like and how risk adverse they are. If they are conscious of risk, and they probably are because they're running businesses, they're running organizations, so they understand what risk looks like, I would present it in that way. I would frame it in reducing risk, identifying and reducing risk to the environment so that we can operate and use the technology in order to do our business. Yes, sir.
So early on you talked about defining your endpoints, or identifying all your endpoints, and then you define endpoints as not just the computer, but also the services and accounts running on that machine. And when I think about how do I tackle that problem and start doing that, I go to a material safety data sheet.
Okay.
So now I have a book that's this big with a page for each server and a list of all the things I care about. That doesn't feel like it scales well. So how do I document that? What's the best way to manage that library?
It's daunting because it's a lot, and again, it depends on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. And it could be, okay, I'm going to identify everything that is a SQL Server. And I'm going to say, those are my endpoints, those are my SQL Server endpoints, and I'm going to treat those as a resource type instead of a specific server running that SQL Server engine. Phones. Every single one of our phones is an iPhone. We know what it is. We can classify those as iPhones, and we can apply the security policy based on that. So during the preparation stage and getting into the categorization stage, you need to decide what systems, how you want to classify those systems, and give them a criticality. So as you increase your criticality of the server or system, you need to get more and more granular on how it's defined. So if I lost my iPhone, I'd be distraught. But it's encrypted, it's locked. Mike will send it a kill message, and then somebody will have a nice, pretty little brick. It's an inconvenience. It's not a super critical thing. So we can classify those as one thing. And it really depends, again, it comes down to how you want to implement the ZTA. And you could say all servers, and this is the way that I'm going to define them. All servers are going to be over here, and whatever IoT is going to be over here. It's not very granular. It's going to be difficult to really implement the zero trust in a way that you can believe that because we're on a contested network, it's an important part, that if somebody is already in the system, that they would be able to move laterally. And then as you refine that process and decide the technologies that you're going to implement in order to control the access in your zero trust, then you will come up with categorizations that make a lot of sense for your environment. It's hard. Yeah, I mean, it's the reason that people haven't done this is because it's hard. I mean, that particular step in itself, even on a small network, will take a very, very long time. And if you're talking about a very large network, it's ongoing. I mean, you basically need to eat that elephant one bite at a time and just move from system type to system type in order to fold them in and then start over and do it all again. Yeah. Okay. I think that we have come to a natural conclusion. Thank you, everybody, for coming and spending some time with me and being, like I said, being a very gracious audience. I greatly appreciate it. Love the questions. That was great. Which, by the way, that's the pancake recipe. And everybody on the live stream, thank you very much for hanging with me. Hopefully everybody got some great information on it. And if you need me, I'll be hanging around.
Awesome. Yeah, and as we wrap up, just don't hesitate to reach out to us at any time if we can be of service. And for you on the live stream, for you here local, we just, again, sincerely appreciate your time to be here today, because it's your involvement and engagement that makes this so valuable. So thanks again. We look forward to hearing about your future success with ZTNA and other things, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.